Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for today's SEJ webinar. It is super sunny here in West Virginia, so use the chat box. Let us know where you're at. Today, I'm here with Pat Reinhardt. He's the VP of Services and Thought Leadership at Conductor. So Pat, welcome back to another SEJ webinar.
Yeah, hey, great to be back. Always love doing these with you.
Awesome. So before we get into some housekeeping, they're putting on a roof next door. So if you hear my dog barking, it's just because there's just too much going on outside. So ask for a little bit of grace there. But all right, today we are here to talk about Google algorithms from this past year, what the future is going to hold, and Pat's going to share some predictions for how you can get started into, or what 2024 might look like. So with that, my name's Heather. I'm going to be your moderator today. First, if you experience any technical difficulties, use the chat box to let us know. We do have closed captioning. It's the little CC in that top right corner. Just give that a click. And if you have questions, we're going to do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. So you can throw them in the chat box. You can throw them in the Q&A tab. If you see a question that you like, you can give it a little thumbs up. That'll tell us that it's important. And we'll do our best to front load those at the end of the presentation. We are, let's see, if you can stick around, we have a short survey. It just helps us gauge today's webinar, how we can make it more useful for you in the future. And you will receive today's recording and the slides later in your inbox. And so with that, enough from me. I'm going to turn it over. Pat, it's all yours. Be back at the Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Heather. So everybody, welcome to the webinar and very excited to be here again. I love working with Search Engine Journal. And, here we are today to talk about 2023, a little recap of 2023, but more importantly, like what's coming, right? Like we have a big year, next year. But before we get into that, who am I? So, hey, everyone, my name is Pat Reinhardt. And outside of being a 41-year-old man with a mohawk, I also lead professional services and thought leadership at Conductor, which is an organic marketing platform aimed at, giving you all the visibility that you need into your organic campaigns. I have been in SEO for about 20 years. You're going to see a little cartoon version of me, throughout this entire presentation, because why should anyone take themselves so seriously? And I, unfortunately, am from New York. I see there are people here from all over the world, really exciting. And for anyone that knows American football, the Jets are a very sad team, and I am an unfortunate, jaded fan. But that's not what we're here to talk about today, although I could talk about it. But let's jump right in and talk about 2023 and about the year that we have had, right? So what we're looking at here is a recap from all the updates that have rolled out so far this year, right? And as you can see, there's about, 8 or 9 updates, and they've been kind of mixed, right? But one thing to note on all of these is that, there have been 4 core updates. And for anyone that doesn't know, a core update is an update that impacts your site broadly across a variety of, of elements on your site. And it's not specified to one particular thing. Speaking of particular things, there were 3 review updates over the course of the year. And what review updates are, those are not, they started impacting just product reviews. They were actually called the product reviews update up until a couple of iterations ago. But now they apply to all types of reviews. So that could be, that could be an event, that could be, a piece of food, a piece of content. It could be really about anything and any content that goes along with it. There was one helpful content update. So the helpful content update that rolled out in September, it was a bigger one. And really what this aims for is to look for content that Google deems that was not written for search engines, but was written for human beings, and thus is helpful to human beings. And then there was also one spam update. Spam update didn't really impact anything. What that goes against, that's looking for sites that are scraping or are hacked or things of that nature, cloaking. And those are the updates, so those are the 9 or so updates that happened throughout the course of the year. But one thing I do want to mention is when you look across the charts, when you look at the charts across the entire year, and what we're looking at here is SEMrush's volatility sensor. They're one of our largest data partners here at Conductor. And you can see that volatility was the name of the game once again. So last year, I did a similar presentation with Search Engine Journal, that talked about the increased amount of volatility that we have been seeing in Google. And what you see here is all the Google logos. That's when these updates rolled out, right? And as you can see, moving along here, typically after an update, you start to see tremors or you start to see peaks, right? But, a big question that a lot of people have is, but what about all those other peaks, right? What about the ones that happened here, right? Like there was no Google update that happened there. What about the one that happened here or the one that happened here or here or here or here? You guys get where I'm going with this, right? But from that perspective, Google tests things consistently throughout the year, right? And just because there wasn't a named update, that doesn't mean that Google is not going to be volatile. And this is something that I talk to folks, a lot about over the course of the year, is that, Google will do 9 or 10 updates every year, like named updates every year. That means they're going to come out and they're going to actually name it and announce it either through the Search Liaison Twitter account or on their webmaster blog. And one thing to note is that this year was no different. And one thing that we also did see, and I would draw your attention to the bottom of the screen where you see a couple of logos overlapping with one another. So last year, one of the things that we had rolling into 2023 from 2022 was one of the first instances of two named algorithm updates rolling out on top of one another. And they rolled out in quick succession of one another. So typically when a named update rolls out, Google will give it at least a month or so, historically, before they do another named update or things of that nature. What everyone needs to recognize is that since about 2021, I would say, maybe even before that, Google has been fastly accelerating how many updates there are, how much they're testing, how much they're shifting things around. And it gives people a little bit of a headache, right? And that, because when something rolls out, like for example, in October, there was a core update and then there was a spam update, right? And then right at the beginning of November, we had another core update and then we had a reviews update that rolled out right on top of one another. So what's hard to understand is if your site was impacted either positively or negatively, was it impacted because of the core update? Or was it impacted on one of the other names update, like the spam update or the reviews update? And that's the hard part. And that's something that we all have to recognize, that 2023 accelerated that. SEMrush actually changed the way they measured volatility because because of how volatile Google had been consistently. So again, we were at a higher level of volatility more often, and Google is testing more things and rolling out more updates. And 2023 was no different. And that's something that everyone has to recognize, is that moving forward into 2024, and we're going to get into that right now, that everything that I'm seeing happening in the industry and everything that I'm seeing happening in the algorithm and from our customers here at Conductor is that more volatility is creating more opportunity, but it's also creating a little bit more, more headaches, right? And next year is a big year for SEO as SGE is going to launch, which is Google's search generative experience, and AI will be included within the search experience, much like is happening in Bing with Bing Chat right now. And so keeping that in mind, that, the headline there is 2023 continued the volatility that we saw in 2022 and 2021, respectively. And I think moving forward, we are only going to see more movement. We are only going to see more volatility. We are only going to see more ups and downs, right? So everyone just has to take that into consideration. And I think from that perspective, it gives you a good idea of what we're kind of in for moving forward. So let's get into 2024, because I think that's what is really important here. Is like all of this, like the volatility, all the movement. Pat, what should I do, right? Like what's coming and what do we think that what do we think that we should do? So moving on, let's go in the first one. So number one, this is probably a slam dunk and probably one layup for me, but like SGE is going to launch and it is going to wreak havoc on rankings and click-through rate. And I'll talk about why that is and a little bit more about what SGE is, just for anyone who who may not know what's happening yet. Next, specificity will become increasingly important. The more specific you can be with your content, the better off you will be. And again, I will give examples of why I believe this. Next, you will need to establish entities within your organization. It still shocks me how many folks don't have someone, one or two people within their within their organization that writes their articles, or is the thought leader in their organization, or is just someone that can be credited with. But that is going to become way more important. And again, I will give examples as to why I think that is. And then we're going to talk about real estate versus rankings. When SGE launches, and even now, it doesn't even have anything to do with SGE really, but like the concept of a rank, like, hey, I want to rank number one for XYZ. That's a concept I really want to dig into because I think it's going to be more about how much of the SERP or the search engine result page that you take up and how often you're showing up versus I rank for this keyword in this place. So let's jump into some explanations because I see a lot of questions in the chat, and I will get to the definition of SGE right now. So what is SGE? So what SGE stands for is search generative experience, right? It's an early step in transforming the search experience with generative AI. And for anyone who doesn't know, you are able to get into this beta right now through Google Labs. So when you go to Google, you will see a little beaker in the upper right-hand corner, and that is their labs area. And that is the place where you can actually sign up for the beta. So from that perspective, what you're going to start to see is when you Google something, you're going to start to see this box up here generate, and you're going to start to see the word generating, right? And what happens then is that Google is using their AI, to come back and basically take content from all over, their index, and ultimately, create this new experience, right? And from that perspective, it is going to really change kind of the makeup of the SERP, right? So when you think about opening this up, this is going to be what you're going to see, right? You're going to go from here where you Google something and you start to see this box generate. It is then going to show you something like this. And again, this is still in beta where there are, not a ton of people in regards to how many people use Google every day using this. And there's still thousands and thousands and thousands. But ultimately, the experience is going to change, right? And all of this data, this is a new way to think about rankings. This is a new way to think about content. This is a new way to think about search. And because, when you think about this, what's the number one ranking here? Can anyone tell me what a number one ranking here is? Is it this? Is it this? Is it these organic PLAs down here? What is number one if this box happens to show up? And it doesn't show up all the time, but ultimately, this is going to change and really redistribute a lot of traffic. Now, there are some doomsday commenters out there that are saying oh, it's going to displace half of your traffic. Everyone's sites are going to tank. And I think that's a little extreme, because at the end of the day, when people think about AI, especially SEOs, they're all like, oh my God, AI. It's oh God, I'm so scared of this thing, right? And the ultimate, what it comes down to is the people that typically do best during these huge changes, especially in search, and I've been through 20 years of zoo animals, that have come out of Google's algorithm. Each and every one of them has been good for the industry, good for the profession, and ultimately good for search, right? And the funny thing is that we really shouldn't be afraid of AI. We should lean into it, right? We should lean into that turn and lean into that curve because the skill set that we could, that we're all learning right now will be so beneficial to companies and to our future careers. But ultimately, we have to learn how to work with AI, and everybody needs to calm down because everyone keeps calling me, and every person I talk to, every customer I talk to, colleagues, things of that nature, everyone is calling for the end of the world, here from an SEO perspective. And ultimately, that is just not true. This will wind up being uncomfortable in the short term. Yes. Will some traffic be redistributed? You bet your butt it will, right? There's probably upwards of 20%, 20% plus will probably be displaced by this. But that doesn't mean it's going away, especially if you get ahead of it And ultimately, if you look at and if you follow some best practices that Google has been laying out for years, Google's been laying best practice out for years on how to combat this. And really what comes down to is creating great content that people actually want to read. And again, we're going to talk more about this, right? Because when we work with AI, then we can start to really understand it. It's like, it's like, hey, how does this thing work? How does this thing really work within search? And we can really adapt to it, because the people that are going to get left behind are the ones who don't adapt. And I can tell you that from experience. Like, I remember when Penguin and Panda rolled out, there were people who adapted and they thrived, and there were people who didn't and they failed. And I can tell you, like, if you're afraid of this, you will fail, but you got to lean into it and you got to learn it, and you have to understand what is happening, right? And the other main point for SGE is that things are going to change, right? SERP is going to look different. There's going to be all different types of rich snippets. There's going to be different elements within that box. Sometimes it's going to generate, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it won't be there at all, like in medical terms. Sometimes it'll be half there. Sometimes you'll have to prompt it to generate. And other times people are going to go into conversational mode, and we're going to see these rapid SERP experiences. But everyone has to remember that this is no different than any other change that Google has brought about, right? Like, every time one of these big bang changes, and I'll tell you that a big bang change like this hasn't happened in a while, but that doesn't mean it has never happened. But I've been through a few of them, and I can tell you that it has always been good for the industry, for the people that adapt and for the people that lean into it, and also set expectations with their companies. Like, one of the best pieces of advice, if you take anything away from this presentation today, is to set expectations within your organization and make sure your boss's boss, and every other person, any stockholder in the company knows that this is going to happen, and traffic is going to get a little wonky in the short term, because that will be a good thing. Even if it crashes, you have at least set the expectation so that everybody understands. And listen, everybody, I get it. Change is hard, right? Like, everyone thinks change is hard, and I totally agree with that change is never easy. But from that perspective, I think from that perspective, you have to take into account that if you don't change, then, and everything changes around you, that's not going to be good, right? And this is going to go live probably sometime early to mid next year, at least in the United States. I don't know whether they're going to roll it out globally. But again, everyone has to remember that Google is never going to roll anything out that's going to put their ad model in a bind. And from that perspective, they clearly still have not figured that out. And we still got time, everybody. We still got a lot of time, before this thing does launch. But I think it's good to note that it is, it's something that, like, you should really just be aware of and be prepared for. And again, there's a lot of questions in here. There's someone asking here, like, how long do you think it's going to take for tools, to track SGE rankings? Things are going to change, right? And I think with that, it's good to think about, this is the next evolution of SEO, right? This really is the next evolution of SEO. And one of the big things that I've been talking about is that, specificity is going to be key moving forward, right? And I think one of the big pieces of that is that, Google is looking for the best possible answer to users' queries, right? And that might be in a comment, on a forum, a snippet, or an article, or posts on sites like Quora or Reddit. You're actually seeing that happen already with something called the hidden gems update. And that's something that has really, you've started to see that in regular search, actually. Like, I've been seeing a lot of stuff from Reddit show up, which is really interesting. The next, authorship will continue to increase in importance. And again, like, everyone has probably heard of EEAT, which is experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And that's kind of become, the Google's mantra, right? Or Google's mantra, and it's really permeating into every single thing that they do. Helping them understand who is writing a piece of content and why they are an authority, has definitely become a necessity versus a nice to have. And that's something that you really have to keep in mind. Like, the question to ask is, like, who's the person, or who are the people in your organization that should be writing this content? Who should it be attributed to? And next, again, I talked a little bit about that. You got to think about real estate versus rankings, which is you got to think about the SERP as a whole, right? And how much real estate are you showing up? Like, do you show up in paid ads? Organic, like social. Like you own your knowledge graph, all the different rich snippets that are happening, right? And then ultimately, will you show up in SGE? And, from our perspective, what we're trying to do here is just kind of understand, right? In the near term, what everyone has to think about is, how can we, surface performance insights, right? And think about like groupings of keywords. Again, like a lot of people think about the keywords in a singular fashion, right? It's like, hey, listen, I rank for this one keyword, right? And now you got to really should think about is, like clusters of keywords or what I call keyword universes, right? And then ultimately what we want to do is we have to provide recommendations, we got to identify gaps, and then ultimately do a bit like deeper analyses of those topic clusters, right? And I think from that perspective, you're also going to see a lot of like hyper personalization in the results, right? Like not that you don't, but I think SGE is going to kick this into overdrive, right? And like what we're thinking about building, it really comes down to like really ingesting all the third-party data that you have, and then figuring out how can you use that data in a smart way to make better decisions, right? So that's SGE, and that's kind of what's happening. And as I settle myself down here, again, I kind of want to just throw it out there again that everyone really needs to kind of just lean into the curve on this one, right? SG is not here, or AI, whatever it is not here to get you. It's just here to change things, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. And I think a lot of people, always like kind of default to this is a bad thing, and a bad thing is going to happen here. And while some people will definitely see big disruptions in traffic, I think everyone will see a level of disruption in traffic. But I think from that perspective, you have to think about, you really just have to think about, what is the what is the best way that you can approach it, and how can you control the universe that you're in, right? And not freak out and be like, oh my God, like all these, like this big thing is coming to get me, because I don't think it's coming to get anybody. I think it could be very helpful, especially from a productivity standpoint, and then ultimately helping to take a lot of the mundaneness out of the day-to-day of SEO tasks. And the best SEOs, or the people that I see that are using AI in the smartest way, are the ones that are kind of leaning into it and learning it, right? So getting a little bit more specific, let's talk about specificity, right? And what I mean by that. So when you look at the potential new listings on SGE, I think from that perspective, think about like all the little things that are going to be included, right? Think about all the little things that are included in the SERP right now. You have all these little links, like you have all these little citation links that are happening, that are popping up. And then ultimately, like when you click into those, now I don't know if anyone remembers. I've talked about it a lot, but for anyone who's not aware of Google's passage-based ranking, it's one of my favorite innovations in search that they've come up with over the last 10 years, I would say. And what it is when you Google something very specific, or you Google something semi-specific, let's say, right? Let's say that, like what happened is Google would surface a result, but when you click on the link, it wouldn't just take you to the page. It would actually highlight and jump you down to the page, which is what you're seeing here, right? You can see that this passage is highlighted. And that's because Google is ranking this page mainly based on this passage, based on the query that the user put in. And that's something that I think everyone has to take note of, especially if you weren't aware of this before, because when in SGE, in the beta that I'm in, this is all you see, right? This is all you see are these little snippets, that Google is picking up on, and they are surfacing them, and ultimately, this is what they're ranking. So what does that tell you? That tells you that like content really needs to have a high level of specificity. And I think from that perspective, this is something that everyone, that everyone can do right now. Like, I think if you're a retailer, because I think like this is going to be probably hardest on retailers, because the SERPs that I'm seeing with the SGE bots are e-commerce SERPs are messy already. This is just another thing to add to them, is, with all the filters on the left that they're testing out now and all the different types of rich snippets. It's really crazy how much, e-commerce sites and retailers have to deal with. But I think something that rings true for everybody in every vertical is that you have wisdom in your organization. And that wisdom just needs to be put down on paper. And it just needs to be done in a consistent fashion, right? Like, I don't think the winners are going to be whoever dumps out the most garbage content from ChatGPT, right? Because you're seeing that already. And Google is already building filters to get rid of that stuff anyway. But I think the folks that are going to win are, for example, if you are a retailer, like, and you have a sweaters, or here's a better example, like a wetsuit, like a wetsuit, site, right? I think a category page for like scuba wetsuits or snorkeling wetsuits or things of that nature, right? I think the people who are going to win are not the folks that are just going to broadly talk about scuba diving. I think it's people who are going to talk about temperatures. And what I mean by that is okay, the suits in here are meant for these, X temperatures and these activities. Here's what you can use them for. It's still a broader take on the category, but ultimately it is also it's more specific. And I think those are the types of pieces of content that Google's looking for, as well as the very in-depth, very specific articles that people within your organization can write. And it really comes down to, people have problems, right? Like no one lies to their search bar, right? Like, people are going to go to Google and they're still going to search for problems. They're still going to search for answers, and they're still going to ask it questions. And we just have to be there answering the question in the most specific and best way that we know how, right? And that leads me into authorship, because if you're going to write content, you're going to have to help Google understand who your authors are, right? And that person or that expert within your organization, that's the author, right? But the question that Google is trying to answer is, who is this person, right? Why are they an expert in this industry? Why are they an expert on this topic? And you have to help them do that. And there's very easy ways you can do it. And again, none of this is groundbreaking stuff, but again, it's a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't do, right? So you have to create an author page, right? So many sites that I work with and so many people I talk to don't have author pages, for their blog or their article repository, right? A lot of folks don't link to LinkedIn, from that author page. Google has to understand, who is this person? The best way that you can do that is to link to their LinkedIn page, so Google can see their background and it can see their, who they are, right? If they have a Wikipedia page, same thing, depending on who they are. Links to other articles and publications, both on the site and not on your site, right? Like, what other articles have they written, right? Do they contribute to publications? It's okay to link out to those. It's not the end of the world, right? And then ultimately using author schema. One of the most missed things that I see across our customer base is folks who actually have all these other things, but they don't use author schema on those author pages and on those articles. And it's a huge missed opportunity. And I think that Google is going to start, Google has already started, to give so much more credit to this. But I think it's only going to enhance from here, right? I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger as we continue, to go along here. But when you think about it, just to give you a real world example, and don't mind this very tired looking headshot of mine, but again, a headshot isn't a bad idea either. Who is this person, right? But you can see here on this page, this is my author page on conductor.com. We have a link to my LinkedIn profile. So what can Google do? They can understand who I am, and then they can go to LinkedIn and see I've been in SEO for about 20 years. I worked at Conductor for 9. I worked in an agency. I own my own business, and ultimately all of that. And also that I've contributed articles, on LinkedIn, right? But then when you come back to the page, we have the breadcrumb here. So Google can understand from the hierarchy of my website, that Google, that I am in a leadership position at Conductor. Again, that just raises my expertise and my authoritativeness. Then my title comes in, Pat Reinhardt, VP Services Thought Leadership. It's clearly stated. But then but I think probably most importantly, outside the LinkedIn thing, is all the other articles I've written, right? So these are all articles I've written on conductor.com. But ultimately, with all of that coming together, you can see that there is, you can see that this is, the articles can link here, and then you can link to LinkedIn. You can see my experience. You can see I've written articles for multiple publications over the course of a 20-year career. For Google, that's pretty good to say, hey, if Pat writes something, we're probably going to think about ranking it better than someone else who doesn't have that type of background. And this is not a hard thing to do, in my opinion, on sites, but a lot of people don't do it. So it's interesting. You know what I mean? It's interesting. So from that perspective, and again, I see a couple of questions in here just asked about authorship in general. Authorship is important to everybody. It doesn't matter what vertical you're in. It doesn't matter at all. Authorship is important to everybody. And again, like, let's say that you don't have someone internally. Now, a lot of brands, write like the voice of God, right? It's just this kind of general like voice. It's not from an individual. What I would implore all of you to think about is there's got to be somebody either in your organization or an organization that your organization partners with that would be willing to let you use their name or would be willing to write for your site, right? And that can be done, again, internal is best because you have someone who works there. But again, people bounce around, people get new jobs, but there's got to be someone that's associated with your organization that is the person that writes these articles, or a couple of people, right? And again, every single company that I've worked with that has said, yeah, we don't have that person. Guess what? We found that person. That we've always been able to find that person. I'll guarantee you might be sitting next to that person right now. Look to your left, look to your right. Is that person you? Is it Bill? Is it Kara? It's someone in your organization. But think about that, because I'll bet you there's someone there who would love to talk more and give their opinion on your industry and talk a little bit more specific. Or there's engineers at your organization, that can write all the nitty gritty stuff. Or there are healthcare providers that are associated with your organization. Or there's the CEO or one of the C-level folks, or some type of person that has a lot of experience that is willing to write. Again, every single person that's ever told me, yeah, that person doesn't exist in my organization, either that person is that person, or we have gone out and found that person. So go find that person, right? So moving on from there, how are we doing on time? We're doing good, catching up a little bit. Let's talk about real estate versus rankings, right? So I talked a little bit about this, but when you think about it, all of this here is, this is what an SGE SERP looks like without the box expanded, right? And one thing is interesting is that Google still has clearly not figured out where to put ads yet, right? They clearly have not figured out where to put ads yet. Sometimes the paid ads are on top, because you can see here, paid ads like they typically are, then the SGE box, then there's organic listings, and there's rich snippets. Some people also ask, kind of a normal SERP, right? But then when you go here, sometimes the box shows up on top, which is interesting, because then you have SGE up here, and then you have paid ads, and then you have organic listings, rich snippets, and then people also ask again. And one thing that I have not seen yet them testing is paid ads within SGE. Will that come? Absolutely. Of course that will come. They're going to have to monetize it, to keep their, to kind of keep their, their, kind of the core of their business going. Google's not going to just do this out of the goodness of their hearts. They're going to try to sell ads. And again, this is also an opportunity for them to appropriate even more content and to potentially even create more SERPs to sell more ads, because you're getting the answer right on the SERP. And it really depends like what you're looking for. If you're looking for somebody's age, like let's say like, hey, Taylor Swift, right? It's like, hey, how old is Taylor Swift, right? Right there, you don't really need to go to a website to get that number. It's like you can just Google. It's like, oh, she's, how old was she? 33 or something like that, 35. It's like, hey, Taylor Swift 33 or 35, something like that. It's like, okay, I got my answer. That I think that's okay. Like, no one needs a website for that answer, right? But if they're asking for something a little bit more in depth, like about, like they're asking about, like going back to my original example, like the like temperatures for a scuba diving trip, like which suit they should get. That's something they're going to want to go to a website for. They're going to want to hear from an expert, because that could, that could seriously impact either their health or just the, how well the trip goes, right? And then when this thing opens, you have to understand that Like these citation links, are going to mess up they're going to mess up like what the concept of a number one ranking is, right? Because I asked this question earlier, before the blackout, was what's number one here? Is the citation link the first site? Is this number one? Are these three number one because you don't have to click the little caret to open them? Like here's all the content, and then there's videos in here, there's images in here. Sometimes the map pack shows up in here, but think about that as well. That right now, a lot of time, like one of the biggest metrics in SEO is, hey, like I rank, quote unquote, here and here and here. What happens when that gets shifted, right? It doesn't mean that rankings aren't important anymore. It doesn't mean that tracking rankings aren't important anymore. But what it does mean is that the concept of a number one rank or number two or number three rank changes, right? And that's just a normal evolution along with the concept of page one. Because when you think about it, page one, the concept of page one is also kind of gone. Once Google implemented the infinite scroll, infinite scroll on both mobile and desktop, there really is no quote unquote page one anymore, right? It's just the top 10, because if you just keep scrolling, you'll just keep seeing more results. You don't have to click that next button. You don't have to click to the next page because it just keeps going. And you can see that in Search Console. If you go into Google Search Console, you can see over the last year, like things that were traditionally on page 2, page 3, even page 4 are getting a lot more impressions and even some clicks these days, because it's just easier for people to scroll deeper into Google search results. But it was also an interesting decision by Google, because that got rid of the ability to put ads at the bottom of a page. So again, Google is still searching for how to monetize SGE, which is why we're not going to see it launch until that actually happens. But again, all of those things are what I'm seeing, and just some questions to think about, like about your entire digital presence, right? Like how much of your SERPs do you own? Like your SERPs do you own, right? And that means everything from video to image, et cetera, right? Next, do you engage with customers outside of your .com? Do you answer, do you comment on Quora? Are you on Reddit at all? Are you on social media? Like if so, where? And if not, should you? Does it make sense for your organization to do that? Who are the experts in your organization? I think I beat the horse here a little bit. But it's like, do they write articles on more than your site? Do they contribute to other publications? Is that something that you should spend time and energy on? And then next, do you have, do you create video assets, right? And where are they hosted? Are they hosted on YouTube? They should be, because if they're not, they're probably not going to show up anywhere. But when you think about that, for the first one, it's all about like your knowledge graph and rich results. Are you showing up there? Next, it's all about how you're interacting with people on social media and publications. Next, it's all about social media. Again, people also ask in other publications. And again, then there's video. And these are the things that you can focus on. And again, these are things you should have already been focusing on. Again, this is not like, just because the interface is changing doesn't mean that you should completely uproot your strategy and you should like just kind of torch it. That you definitely should not do that. What you should do is just double down on the things that we know work, which again is, creating great content that people love. That's number one. That's always been number one. But in that, is it specific enough? Who's writing it? Where does it show up? Just keep that in mind as you continue to kind of ponder here, and as you move into next year, as this change looms, because no one really knows when it's going to launch. Like I said, I think it's early to mid next year, probably closer to mid next year, or probably like June, July area. But you should be prepared for it to start tomorrow, because you should have been doing these things all along, right? And from our perspective, on the technology side, because there's a lot of questions about technology, like how does this impact tracking tools and things of that nature. I think that there's a lot of tools out there, but we're thinking about how can we help you write content better with our writing assistant tool, right? We're thinking about automatic keyword configuration and making keyword like not even just keyword research, but like understanding keyword clusters and the keyword universe that you exist in better. How can you understand all of that better, right? And from there also, how do you audit your site, right? Or do you press a button once every year, or once every 6 months, or once every 30 days? Or do you have something that's in kind of real time, watching your site and monitoring your site, because that's how like the best, SEO campaigns in the world are run. Is that it's not that someone's pushing a button and then getting data back and then working off old data. They're working off a process, and everyone should be thinking about that. The best SEO campaigns have the best process and are somewhat mechanical, even though that makes it sound boring, which I don't love. But at the same time, there is but that's something to consider. And then I think one of the coolest things that the technologies will be able to do, and something we're thinking about and building right now, is the ability to go into a platform and just ask a question and get that data back and have a graph built for you based on what your query is. Because then all you have to do is you have to get really good at prompt engineering, right? And you have to just understand how do you ask these questions correctly so that we can extrapolate the data in the best possible way. And these are all things that we're thinking about. I know these are things that others are thinking about as well, which is awesome. That's good for the industry. That's good for people. But I think you should also think about that. You should think about, how can I make my day-to-day easier? What's a mundane thing that you're doing every day? Can AI help with that? Because again, AI is not this scary thing that we should all be freaked out about. It's something that we should embrace. And as 2024 rolls in, we're going to see a lot more of this. We're going to see a lot more disruption, and we're going to see a lot more of this, of technologies helping people do their day-to-days better. And to me, that makes the SEO stronger. It makes the SEO more important. And it just makes the SEO cooler overall, because it's a badass skill set and we should all know it, right? And again, 4 takeaways. If you took anything away from today's discussion outside of Pat needs a new computer, is that we all need to calm down, and that SEO is still not dead, right? AI is not coming to stab us in the gut. We're going to be fine. We've been through worse, right? Next, specificity is going to be key moving forward. Be specific when you create content. Be meaningful. Write something with purpose, not just to write it, not just to hit a number that someone gave you, right? Authorship. Who are the people within your organization? Who are those experts? Is it you? Have you ever thought about that? Or is it the person sitting next to you? Is it someone that you're in a meeting with often? Are they doing that? Are they contributing? Can you get them to contribute? And also, are you telling Google who they are? And then also start to change the way that you think about rankings, right? And start thinking about the overall digital presence that you have on the SERP, right? Like, do you show up and people also ask? Do you show up in the knowledge graph when people Google your brand? Do you show up in other publications? It's not just about your .com. It's about everything that exists around it. And with that, we talk a lot about algorithms today, but the algorithm that matters the most, and we always say this here, is the heart, mind, and soul of your customer, right? If you create great content that they like and love, they will come back to you time and time again, and they will become customers for life. And with that, everybody, thank you so much for joining me today, and also thank you all for holding on while I fix that little blackout crisis of mine. I apologize again. So Pat's going to go get a new computer after this. But again, thank you all so much. I wish you all happy holidays, and I know we want to take some questions. So Heather, I will pass it back over to you.
Okay. I am so excited that the people stuck around as well, because it was worth it. And we only lost about, just a few people, Pat, as they listened to me drone on. So we'll make sure they get the recording, and we'll cut that piece out of it. But okay, so first and foremost, every time you said you need to calm down, I can only hear Taylor Swift when you say that, by the way. And because I do have girls. So somebody put in the chat that today is actually her birthday. So shout out to all our Swifties. Happy 34th, Taylor. Let's get to some SEO stuff. So we'll do like maybe 1 or 2 questions. But we got a question from John. It's got the most upvotes. And so they're wondering, how big of a role will site hierarchy and structure play in SEO in 2024?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, like site hierarchy and structure has always been important. And I think it goes back to just helping Google understand like what your site is about and how your site is built and what it is and what you're trying to put forth. And I think folks that have messy hierarchies do worse, because Google simply doesn't understand the site and doesn't understand how you're trying to get customers through the site. You have to remember, Google is so advanced now, and Google has, is basically a person. Like, it's basically a user coming through your site, and you have to understand, you have to help them understand what your site is about. So from that perspective, I would think that it will continue to be important as it has been. But I think in this new world where Google's just getting smarter and smarter and smarter, I think that it will. I think that that importance will increase over time. And I think in 2024 it'll be just as important as it was in 2023. But again, as Google builds Bard and AI into its algorithm and into its crawlers, I would imagine that having a sound site structure will only increase in importance and increase in value.
All right. So here's another one from Ben. Any indications from Google if they'll update SGC to measure frequently your website if it's showing up in SGE?
Yeah, I mean they're going to have to, right? Like they're going to have to. If they don't give us any, I mean, I would imagine that'll be in the performance reporting in Search Console. And it'll just be, like a visibility toggle, just so you can see like how often you're showing up in SGE, what terms SGE is showing up for, because that's going to be a big question. It's like when I Google something, does SGE automatically generate? Do I have to press it to generate? Does it half generate, and just see half the box? So I think that's going to be a big thing that we see, in that. But they're going to have to give us reporting in Search Console. I can't think of any other way. And you're going to see other people who start to ingest that data and do something cool with it. Conductor is thinking about that. We actually rebuilt our entire crawler to in advance of this, so that we'll be able to crawl it and parse it. So there's going to be a lot of ways that you can do it if you're working with the right folks. But Search Console will definitely be there.
All right. So, and you kind of answered this question. This was another question by a lot of folks, and they were wondering, like, how long do you think it's going to take for tools to start tracking SGE rankings within their platforms? And I think you kind of touched on that. So, I like this question because you did touch on this. So, what if we have copywriters who interview the experts in the company? So, what about like ghostwriting?
Yeah.
And then putting it under the expert as the author?
Yeah, I think that's totally fine, and I think it would be unfair of Google really to expect that every single article is going to be written by one, like one or two people at a company, right? And all those people are going to be these insane experts, right? I mean, this is how business is done. People ghostwrite for people, and that's totally fine. And I think it's just, again, I don't see anything wrong with that, because as long as the source is coming from that expert and it's attributed to them, and you're not just using their name and having someone else completely just right, as long as they're involved in the process, I don't see any reason that there's a problem with that, and I think that that's totally fine.
Awesome. Well, with that, Pat, I think, we'll send these questions over to you guys. And let me say, is there any last words that you want to leave everybody with?
No, I thank everybody for joining once again. I apologize for the technical hiccup, but happy we got through the presentation, because it's important. This stuff is important, and next year is going to be a big year for search, and everyone just needs to be prepared, right? Just be prepared, don't be scared, and lean into it. AI can be your best friend if you allow it to, or at least if you prompt it enough, to be your friend. So just keep that in mind as you're moving forward, because there's a bright future in SEO. And you're all part of it. So, just learn the skills and your careers will grow. This profession will grow. And next year will be probably the best year you ever had.
I love that. I love that. Those are great words as we close out this year and head into next year. So, Pat, tell the people where to find you.
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn is where I post mostly everything, and also on conductor.com. If anyone ever has a question or just wants to chat, my email is reinhardt@conductor.com. I love talking to people. Doesn't matter if you're a Conductor customer at all. I am agnostic. I'm happy to talk to anybody and help anybody of all shapes and sizes, of all companies' shapes and sizes. So please reach out. I would love to chat with you.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank everybody for coming to today's webinar, for sticking with us through the technical issues, and we'll send you out the recording, and we'll see you all next year. So thanks, Pat. Thanks for being here. Thanks for dropping all that knowledge.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hope to do it again next year.
Oh, we will. All right, y'all. See you later. Bye.
Bye, y'all.